Hey there, Jim here. Here's a walkthrough of how I built a list of podcasts on Spotify which are related to sales and business development from my client who is a B2B SaaS company. The purpose of this is to find the right shows where my client can be a guest because guesting on podcasts is a great way to raise brand awareness, connect with quality audiences, and turn that visibility into qualified leads for the business. So in this video, I'll show how I enriched that list using Clay, how I have filtered down to the most relevant podcasts to target for outreach, and how I identify the contact persons behind each show. So let us start first with going to Spotify, and in the podcast section, I'll just type sales in the search bar. So I'm actually now in the page. And in order to scrape the podcast or appearing on our screen, I'll just use the simple Chrome extension called Instant Data Scraper. So here's the quick view of the Instant Data Scraper extension once you have clicked it. So as you can see, there are mapped columns already. So it contains links to the Spotify podcast as well as the title and the creator name if it's available. So what I did is just I scrolled down over the last page of this results, and I just export that into a CSV file and then upload it into Clay. So once we're done scraping the podcast on Spotify, so here's the actual CSV file out of that. And you just have to import that into Clay for additional enrichments. So the most important columns that we should have is the Spotify link to the Spotify page of that podcast, and then the title and the creator if it's available. So I just did like a quick check over the URLs. And so the next step will be to use a web page scraper. And in this case, I use the web page scraper from Serper.dev, which costs 6 or 10 Serper credits, but yeah, it's really, really cheap compared to using, Clay credits. So it's just a simple setup to open the web page and then extract certain information like the creator name, the podcast description, and any relevant URLs that will be helpful for us later. So once you have run that, the next thing that I have done is to use a Clay formula to just read through the scrape data and organize certain data points that we will need later. So for example, these are the URLs that were extracted. So we are taking all of the URLs that are in the podcast description because sometimes they specify the company website, their LinkedIn profile in there. So that will be very useful for us later. And then same as for the contact emails, as well as for any LinkedIn URLs that might be there. And the next enrichment is just to basically qualify if the podcast is really sales or business development related. And in here, I just use a very lightweight GPT model or O-Mini. And we just have to turn off web research so that it would be really cheap to run. So it will just take the podcast description, the podcast title, and judge whether the podcast is sales or BD related. So once we have run that and set the filters, so we were now gonna extract and analyze and organize the data that we got from the scraping, which is the creator name, the website, the LinkedIn URLs, and any contact emails that are already available. So in here, we also did not turn on web research, so we just use a lightweight model to reduce the cost because we have a total of 2,746 rows here. And if you use Claygen for that, that could be really expensive. So we just took the columns containing the formulas which organize the output from the scrape data from Serper. So those are the extracted URLs, the extracted LinkedIn URLs, and the extracted emails. The most important point in this AI enrichment is it will organize the output in a way that, for example, the first creator name, the LinkedIn URL is provided, so it will be returned in the exact order based on the creator name. So if you will see what I mean, sometimes in some podcasts, there are multiple people who are in the show. So as you can see here, and also there are multiple LinkedIn URLs provided. So it will organize that in a comma separated list because we will write that on another table later. So yeah, this is a good example. So as you can see, there are two people here provided, and the way the prompt works is that it will organize also the LinkedIn URL if it's available according to the order of that based on the creator name. So that will be very useful because the next set of columns is just to use formulas to basically separate those data points into one column. So let's say we have, actually, I observed that most of the, or the max number of creators for each podcast is up to three. So I just use three separate columns. So creator one, creator two, creator three, contact email 1, 2, and 3. So I just use a formula to extract the first item, the second item, and the third item in the comma separated list. So as you can see here, it's now cleaned. So you could only see one person per column, one contact email if it's available per one column, and one LinkedIn URL per column if it's available. So because the next step for that is to write that in another table, because we will do a separate enrichment of these contacts, because some of them don't have LinkedIn profile URLs, some of them don't have email, so we will do that later. So the purpose of this is just to organize that data and then push it into another table. So I just use it, write to other table enrichment. So the next set of enrichments is to create a one sentence summary of the podcast by reading the descriptions, also using a lightweight model, GPT 4.1 mini, and also turned off the web research. And for this Claygen enrichment, I actually used Helium, which costs 1 Clay credit per row. I tested, the GPT 4.0 API that we're using, but it could be more expensive, so that's why I just used this. The reason is that it has the ability to visit the Spotify webpage and basically get the latest episode date or the last upload date of the latest episode, which was not available when we scraped the Spotify webpage using Serper. So I just used that to return the latest episode date, because some of the podcasts here are really outdated. Some of them have uploaded last 2020, 2021. So it's been a long time since they have a episode in their show. And then the last column here is just to create a very short summary of the podcast, which will be used as a custom variable in our copy. So this is what I'm talking about. So for example, this highlight ways to achieve financial freedom. So we will see it later when I show you the email copy. So that's it. That's how you enrich the list of podcasts. And let's go now to the other clay table containing the contacts that we have extracted from the enrichments that I have mentioned. So as you can see here, it's already gathered in the column creator name, as well as the podcast URL, podcast title, etc. So the next set of enrichments that we will do here is to tell if the contact email is a personal or a generic email, because if it's a yes, we will use a work email enrichment later, find the appropriate work email for those contacts. And the next set of enrichments is to find their LinkedIn profile URLs if it's not available. In this case, I have used 3 enrichments. So the first 2 columns are using Serper.dev to do a Google search with the query full name plus the company domain, if the company domain is available, and then the word LinkedIn profile. So it's like we're typing into Google search that exact query. And if it doesn't have any output out of that column, I'll use the second enrichment from Serper 2. And the query now here is full name, or the podcast creator name plus podcast title, and then linkedin.com, so that we can see if there are people who have the podcast title as their current job description. So some of it have results, but if those 2 did not work, the last option would be to use Claygen to do a more deeper web research, which is more expensive. But since a lot of rows have already got their LinkedIn URL, so I've only ran a few of them using Claygen. And the next set of enrichments are just to gather additional information, their job title, using the enriched person column. And as I mentioned, to have a work email waterfall if they don't have it up yet, or if they use a generic email or personal email. So just validate it, and then we just run a lookup on the podcast so that we can get the latest episode date as well as the summary. So let's go now here with the filtered list. Okay, so I'm now sharing the filtered list of podcasts. As you can see, it's already filtered based on the latest episode date. So that's why we decided to scrape for that, because what we prioritize first is those that have podcasts within 15 days or 30 days. So we got September 2025. And then we got the work email available. So clean podcast name because, of course, some podcasts have really long names. So just like this one in row 38. So I just used the usual normalized company name and it worked. And yep, let's move on now to the email copy. So by the way, the campaigns are pushed into instantly. So let's just quickly glance over the email copy here. We will just have an icebreaker at the beginning in this part. And just like what I mentioned, that's why we decided to create a short phrase of the podcast summary. So for example, I've been following podcast name, for example, Sales 101, and I love how you highlight ways to achieve financial freedom through business and real estate. So that could be the short personalization there. So in the rest of the email copy, you'll just tell why your story will be interesting for the podcast audiences, and then highlight what kind of value you bring to this collaboration. So it's just very simple, very straightforward on why you want to be featured on the podcast. So that's it. That's the entire process of building a list of podcasts that will be relevant for your outreach so that you could get more podcast guestings to grow your brand and your business. So if you find this very helpful, leave a comment or click the like button. And thank you and happy prospecting.